He stopped at her desk, dropped a white envelope, and said quietly, "No one expects you to finish, sweetie." 61 minutes later, she walked to the front of the room and placed a completed exam on the table. Every problem correct, using his own published work against him. There's a specific kind of quiet that lives in a public library on a Tuesday afternoon in Eastwick, Philadelphia, the kind where the fluorescent lights hum just loud enough to remind you they're there, and the carpet smells like old paper and something close to safety. In a corner of the Eastwick branch library, a 14-year-old girl sat alone with a college-level calculus textbook she had no business reading, and a 68-year-old librarian named Mrs. Grace watched her from across the room and decided quietly to do something about it. She didn't make a fuss. She just walked to the stacks, pulled 2 harder books off the shelf, and set them on the table beside the girl without a word. Naomi Carter grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Eastwick, where the radiator knocked every winter, and her mother, Diane, worked night shifts at Jefferson Hospital as a nurse. 12 hours a shift, 4 shifts a week, coming home at 7 in the morning smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion. There was no tutoring program, no gifted track, no college counselor who knew Naomi's name. What there was that library. And Mrs. Grace. When Naomi was 16, Mrs. Grace slid a single sheet of paper across the reference desk without making eye contact. A flyer. The Harrington Pinnacle Scholarship, $250,000, a 10-year mentorship with a Princeton professor, and a name engraved on a bronze plaque in the marble lobby of Harrington Institute, the most prestigious private academic institution on the mid-Atlantic coast. In 32 years of the prize, not one black student had ever won. Naomi read the flyer that night at the kitchen table. She decided before she finished the second paragraph. She qualified for the finals on objective scores alone, second in the entire mid-Atlantic region out of 1,400 applicants. No interview, no recommendation letter, just numbers, clean and undeniable. What she didn't know was that someone had already tried to stop her, and that the woman who blocked that attempt had been quietly holding the evidence ever since. Professor Gerald Stanton, head of Harrington's mathematics department, had sent an internal email the day Naomi's qualifying scores were processed, suggesting the committee revisit its criteria for holistic evaluation beyond raw test performance. He didn't name her. He didn't have to. Dr. Clara Rhodes, chair of the scholarship committee, received that email by accident, a misdirected forward. She read it once, printed it, placed it in a folder in the bottom drawer of her desk, and said nothing. Then she signed Naomi's name into the finalist list. That was 6 months ago. Now it was the night before the exam. 11:30 on a Tuesday. Diane had just come through the front door after 12 hours on her feet when she found Naomi at the kitchen table, surrounded by loose paper and open books. Diane set her bag down without a word. She filled a glass of water at the sink and stood there, looking at the back of her daughter's head. "You haven't slept," she said. It wasn't a question. "Mom." Naomi's voice was steady. "I think they're going to do something tomorrow." Diane didn't ask who. She had been Naomi's mother for 18 years. She knew who. She pulled out the chair across the table and sat down. "What do you want to do about it?" "I want to be ready." Diane held her gaze for a moment. Then she stood, turned to the stove, and lit the burner under the leftover soup. "Then keep reading. I'll heat this up." She stood at that stove at 11:30 at night and didn't say another word about it. And Naomi opened the bottom drawer of the desk and pulled out a worn yellow document she had read 14 times before. A photocopied academic paper, coffee-stained at the left margin, page 7 folded at the corner, a handwritten signature on the cover, G. Stanton, titled, "Measure Theoretic Decomposition in Banach Spaces, Stanton and Merritt, 2001. In the margin of page 12, beside the paper's central technical lemma, she had written in blue pen, "Tried extending to the general case. It works." She read it a 15th time while her mother watched the pot and the clock move past midnight. If he came at her in the oral exam, she was certain of which problem he would choose, the central application theorem, the one he had spent the most pages building toward, the one no student could solve without having read the paper itself. Diane's shift ended at 7. She didn't go home. She drove straight to Harrington in her scrubs, pale blue, Jefferson Hospital logo on the chest, staff badge still clipped above her left pocket. She parked the Honda Civic in the last open spot at the far end of the lot, next to a black Mercedes she didn't look at twice, and walked toward the building without hurrying. Naomi wore a navy blazer borrowed from Mrs. Grace, tailored in the 90s, just slightly too wide at the shoulders. She knew it. She didn't care. 3 families walked through the entrance ahead of them, 2 mothers and a father, all white, all carrying event programs. None of them slowed at the door. The security officer held up a hand when Diane reached him. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to verify your credentials before I can let you through." Diane stopped. She didn't sigh. She didn't argue. She produced, in order, her hospital employee badge, her driver's license, and the official Harrington Pinnacle invitation letter with Naomi's name printed in bold. The officer looked at each one. Then he picked up his radio to confirm with the front office. They stood there for 5 minutes. Naomi stood beside her mother, with her hands at her sides and her chin level, and her face completely still. The expression of someone who had learned, early, that stillness was sometimes the only form of dignity a room would allow you to keep. Inside the main hall, Naomi stopped in front of a framed display case on the marble wall. 32 names. 32 years of Pinnacle winners, printed on cream paper behind glass. She read every name. Not one belonged to a black student. She took out her phone, photographed the case, and put her phone away. Diane was standing behind her. She had read the list too, quietly, without being asked, and her expression was not surprise. It was the recognition of something she had always known and never needed confirmed out loud. The exam room was smaller than Naomi had imagined. 5 desks, a proctor's table, a wall clock, and a camera mounted above the whiteboard that would feed the live stream into the main auditorium in exactly 6 minutes. 5 students, 4 dark red envelopes at 4 desks. Professor Gerald Stanton moved through the room, distributing materials with the unhurried ease of a man who had been the most important person in every room he'd entered for 40 years. He set the 4 red envelopes down without ceremony. Then he stopped at Naomi's desk and placed a white envelope in front of her. No explanation. He turned to go, then paused, as if remembering something minor, and leaned slightly toward her. His voice was low and almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "If you find anything confusing, just skip it. No one expects you to get through everything, sweetie." His eyes dropped, briefly, to the blazer sitting a half-inch too wide at her shoulders. A small smile. He walked away. The live stream camera would go live in 6 minutes. Naomi understood, with quiet certainty, that those 6 minutes were intentional. She opened the white envelope. Inside was a graduate-level real analysis final exam. Measure theory, functional analysis, 5 problems, none of which belonged in a standard scholarship competition. Her hand stopped for exactly 3 seconds when she reached the 5th problem. She knew this problem, not from a classroom, but from a worn photocopy with a coffee stain on the left margin, found in a donation box at her mother's church, signed on the cover in blue ink, G. Stanton. She set the paper down. She read the entire exam, all 5 pages, beginning to end, before she touched the page with her pencil. It was a habit she'd had since she was 12. The understanding that panic was just what happened when you started answering before you understood the question. Across the room, Stanton stood with his arms folded, waiting for her shoulders to fall. The live stream opened and 350 people leaned forward in their seats. What they saw was a young black woman in a navy blazer sitting in front of a sheet of paper, not writing. A woman 4 rows back said, clearly enough to carry, "She's frozen, poor thing." Murmured agreement moved down the row. No one pushed back. In row 4, Diane Carter heard it. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the screen and breathed through it the way she had breathed through 100 rooms that had made the same calculation about her family. Naomi wasn't frozen. She was reading every problem, start to finish, before touching the page. At minute 8, deep in problem 2, she stopped. The function was defined on a compact metric space, but the accompanying condition implicitly assumed the space was unbounded. The 2 requirements canceled each other out. The structure of the error was too clean to be accidental. She marked the corner lightly in pencil and moved to problem 3. At minute 9, Stanton walked to her desk. "I want every algebraic step shown," he said, loud enough for the room microphone to catch it. "No skipping. If I don't see the work, I don't count the answer." He said it to no one else. Naomi nodded once and continued, adding substeps, margin references, intermediate justifications. The auditorium screen filled with mathematics so thorough that Dr. Yolanda Freeman, an observer from Howard University, opened her backup exam packet and stopped turning pages. He had just made her demonstration twice as complete. At minute 24, Naomi raised her hand and reported the contradiction in problem 2. She would solve both valid interpretations. Stanton, without looking up, "Just do what you can." The microphone caught every word. Freeman underlined something in her notebook twice. She worked through problem 3, then 1, then 4, then both versions of problem 2, written in parallel columns with a margin note explaining the logical contradiction precisely. Then she turned to problem 5, the convergence proof, the one that required a technical lemma existing in exactly one place Stanton knew of, Chapter 3 of his own 2001 paper, published in a journal that had ceased circulation in 2004 and had never been digitized, absent from every course packet and reading list he had ever assigned, unknown to virtually every student he had ever taught, and deliberately kept that way. He was watching her when she reached that page, arms folded, expression neutral, waiting for the pencil to hover without landing. Naomi didn't hesitate. She wrote the lemma directly into the body of her proof, clean and unhurried, the way you write something that has lived in your thinking long enough to feel like your own. Then, in the margin, in small careful letters, Lemma 3.2, per Stanton and Merritt 2001. At the judge's table, Dr. Clara Rhodes had her own monitor, a direct feed at full resolution. She saw the citation the moment Naomi wrote it. She set her pen down. She opened her laptop, searched the paper, downloaded it, read Lemma 3.2 in full. Then she closed the laptop. She folded her hands on top of it and sat very still. Stanton had not yet seen the citation. He was still watching Naomi's face, still waiting for the hesitation that was never going to come. At minute 34, Naomi set her pencil down. No gesture, no exhale. She simply placed it on the desk, sat back, and looked at the clock. 90 minutes had been allotted. She had used 61. The trap had not just failed. It had been dismantled using the materials the man who built it had left behind. She walked to the judge's table, placed her completed exam in front of Dr. Rhodes, and returned to her seat. Stanton laughed too quickly, too loud. He stepped toward the table and reached for the packet. Rhodes placed her hand flat on it first. "I'll grade this one, Gerald." She turned briefly to the proctor. "As chair, I'm invoking Section 9 of the examination protocol. Any submission where the integrity of materials is in question falls under direct committee review." The proctor nodded once and stepped back. Stanton straightened. He looked at the auditorium feed on the wall and made his calculation. "If there's any question about the integrity of this exam," he said, projecting his voice with practiced ease, "the candidate will need to demonstrate her work through oral examination, in front of the full panel, right now. If she declines, her application is forfeit." It was a precise move. Agree, and she stepped into territory he controlled. Decline, and she became the girl who couldn't take the pressure. Naomi looked at him without expression. "I'll do it. On one condition, after I finish, you grade my written exam publicly. Every page, on the main screen, in front of this auditorium." He couldn't refuse. Refusing was a confession. Agreed. In the small waiting room, Rhodes sat across from Naomi and asked about the lemma, where it came from. Naomi described the document, the coffee stain, the folded page, the handwritten signature on the cover. Rhodes was quiet for a moment. Stanton filed a loss report in 2022, a box of personal academic materials accidentally collected during a campus donation drive and distributed to churches in the area. Diane, in the corner, said nothing. She reached into her coat pocket and placed a second biscuit on the table in front of her daughter. Then Rhodes looked at Naomi directly. "I've kept an email in my files for 6 months, the one he sent trying to remove you from the finalist pool. I didn't know when I'd need it." She stood up. "Now I do." People were standing in the aisles by the time the oral examination began. 2 Washington Post reporters had taken seats near the back. 3 Princeton observers sat in the second row. A group of undergraduates sat cross-legged on the floor at the base of the stage because the chairs were gone. Stanton walked to the podium with the ease of someone returning to familiar ground. He wrote the problem on the board in large, deliberate letters, the central application theorem from his 2001 paper, the same structure, the same notation. Naomi had told her mother the night before that if Stanton wanted to trap her, he would reach for the problem he was most proud of, the one he believed no student could reproduce without being taught it directly. The central theorem was the only candidate. She walked to the front of the stage. She looked at the problem. She did not pick up the chalk. She turned and faced the audience. Her voice was not loud, but the room had gone quiet enough that every row could hear. "This problem isn't random. This is the central application theorem from a paper titled Measure Theoretic Decomposition in Banach Spaces, published in 2001. She paused. The author is standing at that podium. 350 heads turned toward Stanton. "I read this paper for the first time when I was 16. I found a copy in a donation box at my mother's church in Eastwick. The cover had a handwritten signature on it. I still have the document." She picked up the chalk. She worked through the standard case, methodically, narrating quietly as she wrote. Then at step 6, she stopped. "The original paper solves the standard case. There's a more general version it doesn't address. I worked it out at 16. She solved both versions, side by side, on the same board. In the second row, Princeton observer David Osey stood up, not to speak, just to stand. A second observer rose beside him, then a third. 13 minutes after she picked up the chalk, Naomi set it down. She carried her written exam to the podium herself and placed it in front of Stanton. My exam, as agreed. Rhodes ran the projector. The first page appeared on the screen behind the stage, 4 meters wide, visible to every person in the room. Problem 3. Complete, annotated, every logical step accounted for. The room was silent. Problem 1. Problem 4. Dr. Freeman was nodding with the involuntary steadiness of someone watching work that doesn't require translation. Then problem 2 appeared. Both versions, written in parallel columns, with a handwritten note at the top identifying the contradiction in the original and demonstrating precisely where the conditions failed. Freeman stood. I reviewed the backup exam distributed to the panel this morning. Problem 2 in that version contains no contradiction. The conditions are correctly stated. That means the exam Naomi received had been altered from the approved copy. That is not a printing error. The sound that moved through the auditorium was low and continuous, like weather changing. Then the final page. Problem 5. In the margin, in small neat letters. Lemma 3.2 per Stanton and Merritt 2001. Rhodes read it aloud into the microphone. Then she looked up. Gerald, for the official record, confirm into this microphone. Are the solutions in this exam correct or incorrect? Stanton stood at the podium with Naomi's exam open in front of him. He looked at the donors in the 4th row. He looked at the 3 Princeton observers still standing. He looked at the board where his own theorem had just been extended by an 18-year-old from Eastwick. 7 seconds. Correct. All 5 problems? A pause longer than the first. All 5. Correct. The auditorium did not cheer. It exhaled, 350 people releasing a breath held since 9 that morning. In row 4, Diane Carter bent forward and covered her face with both hands. Before the vote, Rhodes stood. In the 48 hours before this morning's examination, the Harrington Fund received 3 separate emails. The first arrived yesterday afternoon. The second arrived yesterday evening. The third arrived this morning before 8 a.m. She held a printed folder. The first came from a former Harrington student, now a doctoral candidate at Yale, who attached an email from Stanton declining his recommendation letter on the grounds that his background did not reflect the program standards. The second contained an audio recording of Professor Stanton and Vice Principal Voss discussing the substitution of Naomi's exam. The third came from Vice Principal Voss herself. Margaret Voss stood before her name finished being spoken. Her voice had the quality of someone who had been rehearsing a sentence for 48 hours. I knew the exam had been changed. I didn't stop it. I had been carrying that file for 2 days, telling myself I needed more time to think. What removed every reason I had left to wait was watching a woman in a nurse's uniform, who had worked through the night and driven here, still wearing her hospital badge, stand at the front entrance of this building, while a security officer called for backup, while everyone else walked through without being asked a single question. She looked at Naomi. I am sorry, not to this institution, to you. Naomi looked at her steadily. Saying it matters, and so does the fact that you sent it when it cost you something. That's what I'll remember. The board voted 9-7 to award the scholarship to Naomi Carter. A second motion, calling for Stanton's immediate resignation and an independent review of every black applicant denied over the past 10 years, passed by the same margin. By unanimous vote, the award was renamed the Harrington Carter Pinnacle Scholarship. Stanton left through a side door. No one watched him go. At the podium, Naomi asked the board to use part of the annual fund to send representatives to low-income public schools each year, not to lower the bar, to make sure people know the bar exists. Then she looked toward row 4. My mother drove here after a 12-hour overnight shift. She's still wearing her hospital badge. She brought biscuits in her coat pocket to keep them warm. I didn't win because I'm smart. I won because I have someone who sat across from me at 11:30 at night and said, "What do you want to do? Then do it. I'll heat up the soup." She paused. If you want to applaud anyone, it's the woman in row 4. Blue scrubs, badge still on. The room stood. All of it. Diane shook her head and raised a hand. They stayed on their feet. And finally, slowly she stood, one hand on her bag, one hand flat against her chest, and let them. The Washington Post photographer had the shot before she finished rising. It ran on the front page Sunday. 4 words beneath it, a mother standing up. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe. The next time someone underestimates the wrong person, you should be in the room when it flips. Drop a comment and tell me which moment got you, and where in the world are you watching this from?
Preparation is only a woman that cannot be interrupted. Nami canceled for into restroom with confidence you were in with the reading the same was copy pen paper 14 times, then 15, until someone else theorem became as familiar as her own handwriting. She couldn't control who loved her. She could control who smiled at her proud pleasure. She couldn't control the envelope placed in front of her while everyone else recited something different. What she could control was being so prepared that the child became the proof. There is a version of this story where she breathes, where the gap between what she was given and what other recited feel to right to cross. That version exists, and it happens every day to some people who never find the donation book, never find the mixed way, never find the kitchen table with the soul still warm at my night. The lesson is that talent with preparation is just potential. Sitting in a room waiting, the lesson is it somewhere right now. Someone is handing the right person a harder task carry on them not to have real survivor risk survivor know it's well enough to slide it's in the margin. Know it's well enough to extend it because today they underestimate you is that your preparation becomes something they cannot take back.